Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the SERMAPod. This is the podcast for the Sports and Entertainment Risk Management Alliance. I'm the founder and CEO of SERMA, Rich Lenkov. I'm also mostly the host of the podcast. We are always eager for members to replace me and host them. So if you're interested, let us know. We're really thrilled today to have a couple of experts in the area of AI. And the topic today is one that is really very topical, very relevant. It is AI in sports betting. We've got Baird Fogel, who is a partner at Evershed Sutherland out of San Francisco. Baird, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rich.
And Baird's partner, Reid, also with Evershed Sutherland. She is the head of artificial intelligence for the U.S. at Evershed Sutherland. Thank you very much, Rachel, for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's jump right in. What role, Baird, do AI-driven trading bots play in sports betting, and how do they operate?
Well, I think you also asked whether or not they're changing the game, and I think they've permanently changed the game. A trading bot is typically used in the finance industry, where it identifies and leverages algorithms and can compute massive amounts of data that typically investors couldn't tap into and couldn't access real time to make a better bet on some sort of stock. That same technology is being applied now across the sports betting industry, allowing sports bettors to take advantage of unbelievable amounts of analysis and real-time data collection that they typically don't have to lead them to a more predictive outcome, right? To lead them to a better idea of what a good sports bet will be. And because of the real-time data and the expertise and horsepower these algorithms bring, these bots can actually identify gaps and trends and even produce a combination of sports bets that can make it almost a sure thing that somebody can have a profitable outcome on a bet. So obviously the fraud involved, and that's the duality of AI and sports betting. These platforms and these odds makers and books makers have to also be deploying AI on their side to help minimize this risk and identify fraud and see if there's any unusual trading patterns and betting patterns that are out there.
Baird, without geeking out on us too much, I know it's rather complex, hard to describe, but how does it work? I mean, how do these bots identify these opportunities and capitalize on these market fluctuations?
Well, it's not. It's really not that complicated. I'd like to say I'm a propeller head, but I'm not. It used to favor the sports bettor that would actually spend hours and hours and hours poring over data and analysis and insight and articles. And what AI has done is it can compute those things in seconds, and it can compute them real time. And these bots are out there gathering data from every resource possible, resources that most sports bettors didn't even know about before, right? Localized reports from, say, the Alabama-Georgia game, where the line is moving oddly because somebody at the tailgate knows that the defensive end, that's the star defensive end, may not play. And nobody knows that information, right? But somehow these AI algorithms and bots can gather that information, reduce it very quickly, real time, and allow a sports bettor to adjust. And the bots can actually make bets, right? These same bots are actually conducting trades in the financial markets. These bots can actually identify a real-time gap because of how quickly it can take on this information, how easily it can find it now, and actually place a bet for a sports bettor and take advantage of a gap, some sort of line move, or literally some discrepancy between odds makers that the odds makers haven't found yet. They take advantage of a gap that would normally have taken hours for a sports bettor to find if they even knew where to look. So it's like having a massive amount of spies out there, real-time spies that can collect data that typically and normally and historically sports bettors had no way of accessing, particularly this fast. So you can literally make a change right up until kickoff.
Interesting. So, Rachel, obviously this has the potential to reshape the entire sports betting industry. What future innovations, because this stuff is always evolving, right? As we speak in AI and data analytics, do you foresee that will improve better chances of winning and making more informed betting decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Gen AI is not only going to reshape the sports betting industry, right? It's eventually going to reshape much of what we do and experience in our lives and in our jobs and across society. And to Baird's point, it's really the difference with this newer technology is the volume of data it is capable of processing and the speed with which it is capable of processing it. Right. So the betting industry was always, again, to Baird's point, based on data, but the volume, the quantity of data was not even proportional to what we're seeing today, nor was the processing capacity or speed. But I specifically used the word quantity of data because the other thing that's really important, right, in analytics is the quality of the data. And this is where, is the person sitting at the tailgate party, is their information accurate? Depending on where all of this additional data is coming from, it may or may not be of a quality level that actually makes the outcome more predictive, right, of the game or the final score or whatever is being bet on. So it's really the utility of generative AI in general is not just based on the processing power and the speed and the quantity of data. It's also the quality of data and then what you're doing with that output, right? So generative AI is never going to be able to tell you who's going to win the game. It's going to give you probabilities and predictions and statistics, and there's always going to have to be some level of human oversight. It's the same thing we caution in all applications of generative AI, right? The outputs are fallible. They might be inaccurate. It might hallucinate. It might come up with something that's completely different than what we're asking it to do. And I think the humans interacting with that need to have an awareness so they're using it appropriately. The future innovations, I think it will continue to get more accessible. So right now, a lot of us have ChatGPT and Copilot and things in the palm of our hand, but I think we'll be able to have more sophisticated models on our cell phones and larger models. And I think it'll get faster and even greater quantities of data. But what I don't see happening is that data quality improving, because the way these models are built, it's like a vacuum, right? They just want to suck in as much data as they can consume from wherever they can legally get it from. And so that's going to be the trick. And I think, again, technology is always reshaping the way things work. It's definitely going to change the betting industry, but I don't really see that it's necessarily going to favor the bettor as opposed to the bookkeeper.
Well, let's pick up on that. That's really interesting, Baird. I mean, Rachel asserts that it's not really more advantageous, but clearly the bettors are having more tools. They're being afforded greater tools with AI to gain some kind of advantage. So how are bookmakers on the other side dealing with this increased leverage that bettors have?
Well, to Rachel's point, there's a real duality here, and you can argue that neither side will be favored, but that assumes that both sides are deploying AI properly. Right. If that's the thing about AI. If you're a business owner, you need to be using AI right now to help increase revenue and reduce fan friction and everything else, or you're too late. On the other side, if you're not also putting in programs and safeguards against AI being used against you improperly and unlawfully, you're already behind the eight ball as well there. So bookmakers, odds makers, sports betting platforms, they've got to be deploying these AI tools right now and refining their odds calculation methods so they can keep up with the tools that sports bettors are already deploying. As Rachel said, it's the way it can compute and analyze and take in vast amounts of data that typically weren't available until now. And historically, with the amount of data and the quality of data that Rachel talks about, it just wasn't accessible, and it's out there now. So you better be deploying the right programs so that you are countering what sports bettors are already finding out, so that you can refine in real time, in a dynamic way, your odds to help better protect your platform, the casino, the sports book, whatever it is. And then obviously, you can use AI to detect fraud. You can use AI to detect the use of bots and AI by sports bettors. You can make those things you can outlaw those things from your particular platforms and help identify them and reduce that advantage. If you believe there is some advantage to the sports bettor, you can take measures to safeguard against the use of that technology altogether. And then obviously, and I want Rachel to weigh in on this, you've got to be making sure that you're complying with relevant laws. Data privacy is getting more and more complicated and sophisticated. Obviously the regulations in California, people are still trying to figure out what they mean. GDPR in Europe. Rachel, maybe you could talk a little bit about data. Obviously, we're now grabbing athlete performance data, for example. Who owns that? What are the privacy implications there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually a really complicated question. And the laws in these areas are still evolving. So I think from a privacy perspective, we absolutely need to be cautious about how these models are being built and what data is being consumed. And in the sports world, data ownership is especially complex because you have the layers of the individual athlete and their own privacy rights to their data. And then you have the team, and then you have the league. And you may have networks and other third parties involved sort of in this, and whose data is it? And then who has the rights to license or use that data and for what purpose? So this is an area where we're really getting clarity across the board. There are a bunch of court cases still pending on whether licenses are necessary to use sort of publicly accessible data to train large language models and other AI systems. So that with that still pending, and then who owns the data? And several states have spoken up to say, no, individuals' privacy rights and their personal data do require that you get their consent if you're going to use their personal data to train an AI model or as inputs into an AI model. So there's a lot of areas of the law that are still unsettled at this point, and we're going to have to wait and see how some of these things play out in court. But I do think there are some very solid and concrete principles we can look at now to make sure what we're doing complies at least with sort of the spirit and the direction of the body of laws in this space. And these are things like transparency, notice, explainability. So to Baird's point about potentially, regulating with rules what technologies you can and can't use, I think it is fair, right, for both the bookmakers and the bettors to understand what technologies are allowed and what technologies are being used on each side. And that way you can moderate your own behavior based on that. And I think, again, sort of availability of data, ensuring that these models are only using data they're legally permitted to use in these processes will really help kind of level the playing field for everyone.
So Baird, obviously, I mean, the takeaway there is to mitigate the risk of getting sued or violating these laws, these privacy laws, it's best to obtain a license to use this data before you employ it in sports betting with AI, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's where the mistakes are made, right? People don't quite understand exactly what they've been licensed to use, what they're allowed to use, and then once you even once if you're properly following the license and you grab data and deploy it in some fashion, you've got to be careful where you use it, where you share it. It's the entire trick. And look, there's a balance here that's going on. Regulation, I think Rachel and I both agree, is necessary. The risks are too great. The chances for fraud are far too high. And you saw there was just legislation introduced at the federal level finally. I know there's a competing body of legislation coming out as well. I don't know where we'll end up, but legislation is inevitable here. But look, this has generated a vast amount of new revenue and new demographics for sports and sports betting. One of the fastest growing demographics in sports betting is females between 18 and 35, because it's more interesting to have a bet play to play while you're watching a sport rather than just watching it and waiting for one singular outcome. And so sports betting isn't going anywhere. It's driving unbelievable fan attention and growth, particularly in demographics that sports have not been able to penetrate historically. And so there's a balance going on. It's not going anywhere, but legislation is definitely coming. And again, back to your question, Rich, if you don't understand the license under which you're operating, the risks are even greater.
Rachel, last question we'll leave off with. Are there any ways that this technology is being used for the betterment of the sports betting industry? You know, the flip side to the growth of sports betting is gambling addiction, right? That's obviously an issue that the industry is dealing with. Do you see any ways that this technology can be used for the betterment of the community?
There are definitely, I mean, one of the things that generative AI is best at is spotting anomalies and trends, right? Taking vast amounts of data and then identifying where something seems unusual or out of place. And that's exactly the type of functionality that I can think would have great applications in identifying some of these kind of addictive or unhealthy behaviors and then putting in place, right, safeguards to prevent those. So I think talk about geeking out, not on the technology, but on the legal side. The Biden executive order on AI that came out in October of last year did a great job of talking about sort of the promises and the perils of this technology. And I think we often lose sight of the promises because we're so concerned about all of the things that can go wrong. But things I've already seen come out, I have a teenage daughter, and sort of the controls that are available now to limit screen time and unhealthy behavior by teenage girls, right? This technology really has wonderful potential and applications that can help with health issues, with problem behaviors, with societal kind of general societal harm. So I'm very excited to see about what can happen in that space. And as far as, you know, is this good for the industry? Is this bad for the industry? My perspective on that is that it's here to stay. This is the new normal. This is the society we now live in. I mean, I went to college and didn't own a cell phone. So the times change and the technology's here. So I think the faster we can just sort of accept that and then figure out how to, you know, take advantage of the opportunities, put guardrails in place to limit, you know, the potential harms. Will be the better for everyone.
When I went to college, Rachel, Facebook was actually a book of faces. No joke on that. The website is eversheds-sutherland.com. Baird, Rachel, thank you so much for bringing us up to date on this important and emerging issue. And please come back and update all of our viewers and listeners.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you very much, Rich. Happy to be here. Thank you, Rachel.